So one of the things I didn't talk about with the BCHA and our research is I started a couple years ago now, I think. We have been working on trying to bring together an academic volume of writing on secularism and non-religion and atheism and humanism, activism and research in Canada. Some of this is a way to just put our own work into a book, but it's also a way to connect with the broader research community that we've been slowly connecting with as we've gotten some of our work actually academically published. And as we were working on this, we thought it would be great to involve a number of personal stories of activists in the country who have approached non-religion or secularism in different ways. And one of the people we came across was Paul. Paul lived and still lives out in the Fraser Valley and was the editor of the Chilliwack Times and had been working at that paper for 15 plus years. He started as a reporter, worked his way all the way up to be editor, and he ruffled feathers out there. He was a constant critic of the religious right's influence and really tighten the screws in terms of making sure that the coverage was critical and, honest and fair of the influence of those communities in politics at the school boards and municipal councils. And that didn't make him a lot of friends, I take it, because about a year ago, Paul actually lost his job. He was fired as editor of the Chilliwack Times following an ill-fated tweet, but it seemed like that was more the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of his job, but I'm sure he can get into that directly. So Paul is going to have his full story told in our book if and when it eventually gets published. Teal is currently shopping it around to publishers, and we're hoping we get some positive movement on that. But if not, at very least, we'll talk about it today, and we will find a way to get Paul's story out there because I suspect it'll be quite interesting to everyone. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Paul.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's great. Yeah. I'm really happy to be talking to you guys and see all this. I feel almost like giddy, embarrassingly, because I've not been part of this group or part of this world, and you guys are great. Just hearing some of the stuff you say. I was going to say I want into this club, but I did join a couple of days ago. I don't know what took me so long. So, um, not sure it took me so long after all these years. And I love the reality-based community. That's great. One of you was mentioning fictions, and I love that because I'm a big Yuval Noah Harari fan, and he talks about Homo sapiens evolved in our civilizations, became civilizations thanks to agreed upon fictions. Once we had language, we got to agreed upon fictions such as empires and laws and money and religion, and that's how civilizations were formed. So anyway, that's just off the top of my head. That's just. But I'll give a quick bio. My name is Paul Henderson. I am a recovering journalist, I like to say. I was rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic for far too long. I caught the last lifeboat a year ago. I now work for the provincial government, actually, as an editor in the communications department. I'm also a technical writer for an architectural firm, and I'm working on a few other writing freelance projects. Not freelance, but a writing project, of course, is this one with Teal, which is, I've always said, if this never gets published, I honestly don't even care, because this forced me to write my own story. I've always been a journalist. I kept journals. And so making me write this story this way and getting feedback is fabulous. So literally, if no one ever reads this, I don't even care. Well, yeah, Teal read it. So, um, uh, and yeah, just while you guys were talking, just some amazing stuff came up. It just reminded me of the fact that I have another thing I was working on that I don't have time for is there's a guy who lives in Chilliwack named Jerry Armstrong who in the 1970s was literally at the right hand of L. Ron Hubbard on the Sea Org, and he was there, and he was at one point they was getting a lot of more and more bad media they were getting in the late 70s, and there was he advised them to write a biography, and they agreed, and Jerry was tasked with compiling the research for the biography, not writing it, compiling the research. And the more and more he found, the more and more research he found, the more and more he found that everything L. Ron Hubbard said was a lie. And he assumed, well, he was a hardcore Scientologist, so everything he assumed he was wrong. He FOI'd thousands and thousands of documents, and sure enough, over and over and over again, found out everything L. Ron Hubbard said over the years about his background was a lie. So he fled with his documents, and he fled to Canada and Chilliwack, and they've been pursuing him with lawsuits, suing him for 50 years. Every time he opens his mouth, I think it's like $10,000 he's fined or something like that. He owes millions of dollars to the government, some court in California, and yeah, the file's right next to me, and here's like an ex parte warrant of arrest. If he ever shows up in California, they will arrest him. Anyway, this is the guy who lives in Chilliwack, and he wants me to write his story. And I'm like, oh my god, this is like incredible, but I just never had time for it. So anyway, that's an anecdote I did not plan on talking about, but just hearing you guys reminded me about it. Um, so yeah, for 16 years I worked at the Chilliwack Times and the Chilliwack Progress, I should say. You mentioned the Times, but it was the Progress at the end because 13 years I was a reporter, final 3 as editor of the Chilliwack Progress until I was fired with cause on June 2nd, 2023, after a series of tweets I sent out on June 1st, ostensibly in support of first responders after the near drowning of a 3-year-old boy. I admit, they were insensitive, they were ill-timed, but they also kind of mocked the efficacy of prayer to bring about results in the real world. So I like to say that I crossed a literally sacred line in the Eastern Fraser Valley, or to use Ian's metaphor, it was the straw that broke the atheist's back or something like that. Chilliwack, or the Eastern Fraser Valley, is often been called the Bible Belt of BC. I think that's overstated, frankly, and it's changing a lot, but I'd come to that. And if Abbotsford was the buckle of the Bible Belt, Chilliwack is the first notch. There's an expression in Chilliwack you aren't really allowed to say. It's kind of a joke. It's always been a joke, and it's the Dutch mafia. The Dutch mafia run this town, and they'll take you down. And of course, there's no real such thing as the Dutch mafia, but they took me down. So more on that, a little bit of that later. So I will say quickly that I did file a lawsuit for wrongful dismissal, and my lawyer also filed a complaint with the BC Human Rights Tribunal on religious grounds. It had never occurred to me in the past that someone could be discriminated against for religious reasons, for having no religion at all. Of course, you can, though. All of that made me slightly uncomfortable because ironically, as a strong advocate of freedom of expression, which I was defending, too often, in my opinion, I've seen frivolous lawsuits filed over what seems like hurt feelings, frankly, and nothing much more. But I had a valid claim according to everybody I talked to. So, um, um, and 6 months later, and maybe this isn't nice, but hopefully many thousands of dollars spent on their part, they did settle with me. I won't say any more about that. The settlement did not include a non-disclosure clause. I do have a non-disparagement clause, which is interesting. So I will only say that Black Press is managed by fabulous human beings who I greatly admire from top to bottom, every one of them. Tiny bit about me. I'm from Oakville, Ontario. I have an honors BA in philosophy from the University of Western Ontario. Spent 9 seasons planting trees and not knowing what to do with my life. And I finally went to journalism school in 98, so I think it was 98. And my first job was at the Grand Forks Gazette, a little town of 5,000 people there. And my now wife came with me. We were there for a year, went to Toronto for a few years. She's now a naturopathic doctor, and we came to Chilliwack. We always wanted to be in BC because it's just better than Ontario. So in 2006, I arrived at the Chilliwack Times, and I've been here ever since. So that is now 18 years as of June, actually. I spent a decade at the Chilliwack Times. In that time, we had 4 owners. CanWest Global owned the paper until the industry kind of hit the first iceberg in the 2008 global financial crisis. 2009, CanWest entered bankruptcy and sold to Post Media, which was formed for this purpose to purchase it. And then Glacier Media bought it from Post Media. And then in 2014, Glacier and Black Press traded newspapers in the Lower Mainland, such that Black Press owns every paper on my side of the Port Mann Bridge and every paper on the island, and Glacier owns all the ones surrounding Vancouver. I don't know if it's collusion or what that is, but whatever. It's what it is. The industry is shrinking, and it just made sense. When they bought the Times, of course, Black Press already owned the Chilliwack Progress, which was the oldest community newspaper, is the oldest community newspaper in BC, started in 1891. So when they finally did shut the doors of the Times at the end of 2016, and 2017, I went over there and joined that team and for the next 3 years, I wrote, hundreds and hundreds of stories. I kind of stirred the pot a lot. I did a lot of crime and um, court coverage and got a lot of page views, and they liked me. In 2019, the editor retired, and they couldn't replace him. They couldn't find anybody to replace him. I don't know what it was like in the industry. So 6 months later, I said, I will be the acting editor. I should be the acting editor, is what I said in our newsroom of 5. And the publisher agreed, so I sort of took that over. And then March 2020 hit, and I think we all remember what happened in March 2020. And basically, literally the week of March 16th, the economy just went down. Newspapers went to a nosedive. It was horrible. They lost everything. They went down to one paper a week from 2, and then I was kind of strong-armed into taking the job of editor because they wanted to lay off somebody in the newsroom. They wanted to lay off the sports reporter, and the union said, no, 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 no. This guy's got the lowest seniority. You have to lay him off. And Black Press knew they couldn't. It's not to be arrogant, but they literally couldn't function without me in that newsroom because I was doing the pagination. I was running the paper. So they just forced me to be the editor. So I joked that I got strong-armed into a raise and a promotion, but I didn't want it because I really liked my job and I wasn't sure I'd still be able to do it. But I did continue to do it to the point where then the union filed a grievance against me, that the company fought all the way to the end to a legal decision because basically they filed a grievance saying I was writing too many stories as the editor, which of course, if anyone knows anything about labor law, that is a manager doing bargaining unit work. So, there's an argument there, right? Except for that it's not a normal industry. Like we're not making widgets. There's no finite amount of things you can do. It was an infinite number of stories to be told if you have time. But anyway, company lost, actually. We lost that fight, so that was interesting. But the company had a love-hate relationship with me because I did a good job and I won countless awards over the years, including general excellence for the paper and personal awards. But I tended to do that by often stirring the pot and being controversial. And good journalism can rankle people in power, people of influence, people who spend money on advertising. And you remember the community newspapers that land on your doorstep are, of course, for free, make all of their revenue from advertising. At least they used to. They make a little bit now online. But of course, as has been said before, if you're getting a product for free, you are the product. So advertisers pay for readers' eyeballs, right? And so, you can only be so controversial in a community newspaper because, you're supposed to be making everyone happy and not rankling thing. So there were many times over the years when I irritated the wrong person, former MP and cabinet minister, people might remember Chuck Strahl. He really disliked me, but it's something that he artfully hid for 5 years because he acted like a beam of sunshine right up until election night 2011, when his son Mark Strahl was crowned, I like to say, MP. And I don't know if he was tipsy or what it was, but I arrived at Mark's post-election party and showed up to get comments and take a picture, and he just tore a strip off me. And it kind of surprised me, and I could see the look on Mark's face, the new MP, and he was like really embarrassed. So anyway, with hindsight, I thought that was pretty funny. But so you do that in the community. Maybe he didn't hate me all along, but the stories we did on his controversial nomination process probably irked the whole family. So others like Liberal MLA John Less, who people might remember again, he was in cabinet, Solicitor General for a while. He similarly clashed with me. We kind of had a weird way we got along though. He used to take me out for lunch. I didn't know why, but I think it was keeping your enemies close or something like that. But I was like, I'll take a free lunch. But when he was caught doing shady land deals with a corrupt city official, the province hired a special prosecutor to see if charges were warranted. And my story on page 1 of the paper, under a picture of him, was the big bold headline was "Under a Cloud." And I don't think he liked that very much. So but I wrote op-eds over the years with strong opinions, stirred the pot intentionally sometimes for the sake of public discourse. But the rise of social media um, really impacted a lot of people, and the medium, it's not an excuse on my behalf, but it really turned toxic in a lot of ways, I think, as we all know, especially those of us who didn't grow up with it. It was had a relative newness to it. John Ronson's book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, is really interesting, where he addresses how examples of sort of virtual mobs who formed online to just destroy people who said things they shouldn't, or out of context or what have you. One example, this is maybe warranted, but I think that NFL kicker Harrison Butker, who said some terrible things about women at a commencement speech or something like that, But in these virtual sort of lynchings often end up with real life consequences. So what happened with to me, to what happened to me, I'm just saying is on June 1st last year, there was a 3-year-old boy who fell into a lake. I don't know the details, but 911 was called, and everyone showed up. There were search and rescue volunteers who showed up only because they lived there. It wasn't a search and rescue moment. And then usually police, fire are often the first ones there, ambulance last. They're the most important, but they're often last. And off to the hospital where he was treated by nurses and doctors. And these are the heroic people who help keep us safe, protect us, hold our hand, heal us. Their neighbors, our friends. It's a cliche, I guess, but they're heroes, and I've always been a bit of a cheerleader for all of them. Um, so when I saw this Twitter feed about this specific topic that was filled with people commenting on what happened and discussing how they needed to pray, everyone needed to get together, pray, and create a prayer chain and say to help the boy, and that's what's going to help the boy. I kind of it irked me. Let's put it that way. Um, and I'll read you my two tweets just to be completely honest. Well, there was two more, but they were responses, so it's complicated. My first tweet was, uh, you know what does absolutely zero to help a toddler who might die because she is being attended to after a drowning incident at Cultus Lake? Praying. Nonsense. Instead, let's support our Chilliwack firefighters and paramedics and RCMP officers and search and rescue members. Now that I say that out loud, if I'd stopped there, I probably would have been fine. Because then my next tweet was, I really hope this little boy is saved by the emergency responders who are the only, all caps, ones who will do so. I'm somewhat mortified by the ridiculous prayer posts, as if that's a thing. It is not a thing. Stop it. FFS. I think you know what that stands for. So it was rude and it was ill-timed. Next day I went to work, chat with a publisher who was a friend, and a couple hours later I was in her office on a video conference call with the head of HR and the COO of Black Press and the group publisher, and I was fired with cause. So about an hour after 17 years of employment, I cleaned up my desk, computer was taken away, benefits ended, it was all over. Reporters were shocked. My reporters who worked for me were shocked. They were like, except for the one who hated me and filed that grievance way back then, but it's okay. And then next came like the social media tsunami. Like it was hilarious. Like it was, I had a lot of very positive response, but some of the loudest, earliest voices were really, really angry stuff. Like there's a couple of my favorites on the draft. Teal will know these because they're on I put them in the beginning of little sections of my chapter. And the very first one was from someone named Stuart Joseph. It was a direct message on Instagram one day later. It said, I'm glad you got fired, you goof. God did that to you, you fucking loser. Okay. Uh, and another one I like, same day actually, it was an anonymous direct message. Heard you got fired, you fucking communist piece of shit. Well, I was praying for that, so I guess prayer is a thing. FFS. So that was the start of my feedback, which is interesting. I did get mostly support from people I knew. Ironically, the more angry it was, or the more anonymous it was. Maybe that's not ironic. That's just the reality of communication, I guess. Because people closer to me, and then even people, religious people who knew me, like there's this woman Tamiko who's an evangelical Christian. I know it. I've written stories about her and her. She does horseback riding for disabled kids, and her husband actually was one of the conservative candidates that wanted the nomination Mark Strahl got. Maybe that's why she likes me. But anyway, but she was very upset that I was fired. She understood what I said and knew what I said, and she was very upset about it. Literally last week I was at a grocery store, and one of the Crown Council in town who I've dealt with a lot. She called out Paul, and she's a Catholic. I know she's a Catholic. She pointed that out because her husband is very involved in the church, and she's told me I was her hero. And I said, well, that's hyperbole for sure, but very sweet. Thank you very much. So there was a lot of very positive stuff, but it it was tough. And then within 2 days I was contacted for interviews by the Vancouver Sun, CBC Vancouver's morning show, the early edition, Rebel News, a Punjabi radio station wanted me for a call-in show. Anyway, I declined the early edition because I didn't think it was in my best interests, and I love Stephen Quinn. I've been on his show numerous times, but I don't know. I didn't want to hear. He's a great guy, but he's a scary interviewer if you're and I didn't think it was in my best interest at that point too. Same with the radio station. Although the Punjabi radio station guy had contacted me later to say that he did the call-in show anyway. And of all the calls, apparently I had 60% support. So I thought that was pretty not bad. However, Cheryl Chan at the Vancouver Sun and Drea Humphreys at Rebel News both told me they would do the story whether I commented or not. So I did. I probably should have been more diplomatic with my comment to Rebel News, but I hate them so much that I just, anyway. But when my story was told properly in context, as the Sun did, or Sun, I shouldn't say the Sun because it's actually Post Media, Sun and Province ran it, or told kind of maliciously by a bad actor like Rebel News, the overwhelming sentiment after that was sympathy, actually, and anger about the situation and silliness about it. And like I said, what I said was rude, insensitive, ill-timed. But I don't think much more than that. And it was also true, as all of you know. I mean, I was just thinking, I've been watching a lot of comedy lately, and I was just thinking how like Ricky Gervais spent the last few years of his career on Twitter saying exactly the same thing I did. Like he was on a show, what was it? The Jerry Seinfeld show. He said, what could be more arrogant than praying to a God that didn't stop the Holocaust, hoping he'd help you find your car keys? So that's my prayer, And then came the lawyers and people came out. An old colleague at Post Media, his wife is a labor lawyer, and they sat down and they talked and said, absolutely the case. She didn't think she could take it. So, anyway, someone took it and it was amazing. But again, to the Dutch mafia, I can't even say Dutch mafia out loud because he always said it was always a joke. Like it's just this pejorative. It's either a pejorative or you're just joking. Like, oh, Dutch mafia, that's what. But it's kind of silly. The piece I wrote so far for Teal had started with an odd interaction, an anecdote I had with former Socrat MLA and cabinet minister John Jansen in front of a donair shop where I was walking up, he was sitting in the passenger seat of a pickup truck, and he looked at me, he smiled, and he looked up and he pointed at the sky like that. And I was like, what are you pointing at? What are you? And that was literally the entire interaction. But I mean, he's, if there's a Dutch mafia, he's the godfather. He's very religious, socially conservative. He's wielded a ton of power in this area, literally since the 1970s. Maybe not anymore, but he did. And if John Jansen was the godfather, John Less is the consigliere, I'd say, because they ran together on city council in the 1980s and got on council. But after that incident, John Less claimed he was vindicated after that special prosecutor concluded there wasn't enough evidence to get a conviction. And of course, he wasn't vindicated. In fact, the city's approving officer was charged with what he did to subdivide ALR land for John Less illegally. Less didn't lose a step, though. He remained the man you had to go through to this day. You had to go through him if you want to be a candidate for the BC Liberal riding in this area. You have to go through John Less. He's the guy. So he remained untouched. But an anecdote I want to tell on the other side of that is related to religion, frankly, is former UFE criminology professor John Martin A very conservative guy. He actually tried to run for the BC Conservatives. He used to write a syndicated column for Post Media when we were with Post Media, so it appeared in our paper. I used to curse his name under my breath because he really conservative guy. Anyway, he became the MLA as a BC Liberal, and I forget the year. Um, not long after that, his constituency assistant, Desmond Devnich, was convicted for stealing more than $100,000 from the office accounts. I covered the case closely in the newspaper, obviously, and the usually confident, almost arrogant John Martin was shocked by the response in the community. After the six-figure theft was made public, the community message in general was, "Oh, poor Des. What will Desmond do now?" And John was like, "What?" He just City Councilor Sue Attrell took him under his wing. He was hired by the local BCHL hockey team and soccer association for marketing work. Attrell then hired him at the Hospice Society, where she's director. I saw him manning a tourism Chilliwack booth in November. So what happened? Well, Martin is a staunch conservative, but he likes beer and barbecue and classic rock, and he is not a Christian. Devnich is a devout member of the Chilliwack Alliance Church, the largest of many very large churches in Chilliwack, and he sings on Sundays. He would sing the anthem at hockey games. And it seems like this, like, again, Dutch Mafia accepted or at least tolerated John Martin because he was an electable conservative guy. But his lack of religiosity meant that when a devout Christian stole more than 100 grand from him, the thief received solace and John was shunned. He moved to Nanaimo, actually. He left town. And after I was fired, he's got a very dry sense of humor, I should say. And after I was fired, we had a chat, direct message chat, and he said, "Oh, by the way, there's no Dutch Mafia. John Les made that very clear to me the day he told me he decided to allow me to become the next MLA." I thought that was pretty funny. And I'll do this quickly. There's 4 elected officials who I went into great detail about in the writing I wrote for Teal here. And I think they're worth mentioning just because this is, we're talking about religion, we're talking about separation of church and state, and we're talking about people who just get away with saying just bizarre things. Like I grew up like agnostic household and atheist, and I didn't know anything about religion, so I'm very naive about it almost. But the fact that these people get elected is just bizarre to me. The 4 people would be school trustee Barry Neufeld, who I've mentioned, and some of you might know just because he got so much notoriety for his stupidity, frankly. Another one is 2-term MLA Laurie Thronis, Chuck Strahl, I mentioned. And then there's a school trustee named Daryl Ferguson, who is actually a young Earth creationist. He's something else. So Neufeld went from being sort of an ineffectual trustee who was often caught napping at meetings to one who just turned out to be homophobic, COVID conspiracy theorist. He actually just literally was nobody for behind the scenes forever. And then in 2017, he lost his marbles and made this giant Facebook post where he said he can't sit on his hands anymore, and he basically acted courageous in standing up to Soji 123, which he called a weapon of propaganda to infuse the schools with gender theory. And we've all heard this before. And as an editor of a newspaper, well, at the time reporter, editor later, he was kind of a bit of a dream, frankly, because school board is insipidly boring given the lack of power trustees have. They're dealing with $100 million budget, and they have control over about 2% of it or something like that. Like they deal with policy stuff, right? So anyway, but he gave us headlines a couple of weeks for 6 years. It's probably, he claimed Canada's chief public health officer Theresa Tam is transgender, and which is insane. But also, even if she was, because of that, we shouldn't trust her. So anyway, he also blamed the WHO for anyway, conspiracy theorists, crazy. Education Minister Rob Fleming just constantly loses marbles at that very new film. It was very funny. And then he called me and one of my reporters retards in a tweet, and he was excoriated in the media for that, and I became again the subject of, because I had to respond to that. So it was anyway. And then another one, again, Laurie Thronus. He emerged in the 2012 by-election, having previously worked in Ottawa for Chuck Strahl. Before that, many years ago, as a youth, he worked for a Socrat MLA. He was then a policy advisor to Preston Manning, Stockwell Day, Stephen Harper, so all the good ones. His father and brother are, or maybe still are, were our pastors. But he got kicked out of the BC Liberals, frankly, for being too conservative, which is hard to do for most people who know the BC Liberals are very liberal. Um, I'd write again in the piece about his three strikes. The first one was that he defended Barry Neufeld's anti-Soji comments, which Andrew Wilkins, I forget his name, the leader of the time, did not appreciate. Like, he didn't want to back up Barry Neufeld, but he stood by him. And then second, he expressed his support for conversion therapy, which is the pseudoscientific. People know what that is probably. And then they were holding on to him right up to the election, and days before the election. And then he compared an NDP promise to offer free contraception to eugenics. And man, that was like, boom, okay, that's it. You're right. It's take 3, you're done. So anyway, that was Laurie Thronus. Again, very nice guy. I always got along with him. I remember a Christmas card from him. It just popped into my mind. It started with like a caveat, like, despite the fact that we don't get along, Merry Christmas. Right. Interesting guy. And again, Strahl, the story about Strahl was that probably he didn't like me. And this is where, it sounds kind of like almost mafia-like or what have you. Maybe royalty is the word. But it was on March 11th. I wrote this down. March 11th, 2011. He told the party he would not seek re-election. March 12th, he's told the media. March 14th, the party set a deadline of March 18th to file nomination papers for the riding. Now, 2 potential candidates in the area, the one actually the husband of the woman I mentioned earlier, and another guy who was a prominent lawyer in town, they were livid. They were so mad. They were about this timeline. They were like, there's no way, even if you work at, I think, what did the guy say? Even if you worked at a muffler shop, you don't have time to stop your business and organize a campaign. But Mark Strahl was ready. I don't know why, for some reason. Anyway, I remember there was a quote I like. The Conservative Party member, political science professor Alexander Mullins told Province columnist Michael Smythe that high public office should not be like a family business where it's passed on from father to son. But that's really what happened there. And yeah. And the last one, Daryl Ferguson, who won a seat on the Chilliwack School Board, just one term though. He has a PhD in something to do with religion from a university in another country. I forget where it is. But he also spends his time, he's got a Facebook page, a thing he runs called Worldview Studies Center. And basically it's mostly spreading anti-Islam rhetoric and evangelical Christian stuff. He does it both online, but he actually goes to third world countries and spreads it there too, which is odd. But he defends any homophobic stance he can find, backed by his biblical worldview. He says he even defended Neufeld's use of the R word to insult me, which he then found like the Oxford Dictionary definition of. Anyways, it's just ridiculous. And he literally is. And this is like, if I made him up for a fictional book, you'd say that's not a believable character, make more. He literally believes the world is 6,000 years old. He has posts on his Facebook page that, like, where there's people doing videos like claiming to explain scientifically why they are right and why the world is only 6,000 years old. And it's, again, you can't make this stuff up. So I mean, these are the extremes in Chilliwack, let's be fair. Like, these I'm pointing out to, most people are normal, let's be honest. But everyone who had issues with me during the pandemic or regarding my prayer comments, without fail, had other issues with me. And the parallels are not a mystery. Whereas you see, like with climate change denier, John Less was like climate change denier forever. And you see with many climate change deniers, they are fervent Christians, basically because I think the concept of that the earth is not ours to do with as we please goes against scripture. So, I don't know if anyone has read I highly recommend it, but Lee McIntyre's 2021 book, How to Talk to a Science Denier. Don't have it right here. Anyway, In it, he looks at various conspiracy theories in the book, but he kicks it off at a flat Earth convention where he comes to the same conclusion I did. He says, and this is a quote I copied down. It said, "Even though very few Christians believe in flat Earth, almost all of the flat earthers I met were fundamentalist Christians. While they do not seem to rely on their faith as scientific proof, they did seek empirical evidence that would make all of their beliefs, both spiritual and worldly, consistent. And it must be said that most flat earthers seem to embrace their views with a fervor that was tantamount to religious conviction." So it's just an interesting parallel with a lot of the conspiracy theories that they tend to be religious people. So anyway, and I'll wrap up real quick here. I just was going to say, and I think I've said it a couple times, that a little bit of this is unfair. Like I'm caricaturizing Chilliwack because it's not like this. Like I say this all the time. In fact, I don't have the stats now, but I took a deep dive into Statistics Canada um, numbers on Christianity or whatever religion it is. Not just Christianity, of course, in cities based on CMA or CA in Statistics Canada, and like it's literally no different in Chilliwack than it is in like Coquitlam or Nanaimo or Victoria. Like it's not any, and that's because it's changing. And I don't have the statistics to back this up, but like I just saw this, so I grabbed this anecdote, which was actually a Scottish, the results from the 2022 Scottish census, which were recently released. And for the first time ever, a majority of citizens, 51.1%, declared no religious affiliation. So, like specifically, that's 2.8 million of Scotland's 5.5 million people cited no religion. And that number was 24% in 2001. That number was 39% in 2011. And that number was 51% in 2022. So, I mean, I always say that things happen. I'm an optimist. I think the cup is half full. I think throughout history, we have moved towards progress and more positive thinking. And, we don't, we maybe aren't good to people who commit crimes and had terrible upbringings, but we don't draw and quarter them anymore. We don't hang them anymore. We don't, in every area that probably a lot of people on here feel we should make improvements is infinitely better than it was 100 years ago. And that's not bad in the history of human existence, right? So, um, um, yeah, and then just one last sort of anecdote that I wanted to tell. I told Ian and Teal because I had to tell somebody and I didn't know who to tell because it was hurting my brain. But a friend of mine who is actually my next door neighbor, she is a doctor. She's a medical doctor. She often works in the ER. And just this week, she told me I can't remember why I was talking to her about whatever. Our dogs are sisters, actually. And we were talking about that. And she prefaced her anecdote with the reminder that she is Christian. And I know that because they go to church every Sunday. They're gone to church every Sunday. But she even told me even further. She even believes in the power of prayer. She claims she's seen prayer create things happen in real life. And I'm like, okay, awesome, whatever you say. But she's a medical professional and she believes in science. And she was really upset about something that she saw and heard. And that was that the day the 3-year-old fell into Cultus Lake and nearly drowned, when he was found and taken out of the lake, my doctor friend told me that for more than 5 minutes, no one performed CPR or attempted any resuscitation on the little boy. And what were they doing instead? They were praying. And I just can't believe it. So that's all I got for now. I could speak for hours since I started writing this. Like I said, and Teal told me to make it more ethnobiography. I think I gave him like 11,500 words, and I was like, sorry. But it reminds me of the like I'm an editor for a living, and I constantly cutting people's writing down or whatever, and it reminds me of the famous Mark Twain quote, which is I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one instead. And it is true with writing; it's easier to just ramble on. But Teal will help me kill my babies, hopefully.